Chapter 7. The Engineer.
Taipu! Taipu, can you hear me?
Onepu coughed out the remaining traces of water that had attempted to infiltrate his lungs as he crawled along the cold and wet ground. Amidst the pitch-dark cavern, his eyes failed to register his surroundings, forcing him to rely on his hands to map out his path forward. He clambered along a maze of debris and splashed through deep puddles before pulling himself up on a fallen stalactite. He draped himself over it and spared a moment to catch his breath. He was unsure how long he had been searching, as all concept of time seemed to have gone with his eyesight. He had drifted in and out of consciousness as he fought to hold his breath against the unforgiving flood, eventually finding himself drifting toward the bottom of the great mine surrounded by chunks of rock, light stones, and dead Bohrok. Once he swam up, he found the flooding had ceased, leaving the floodwater to stagnate in the mine. He crawled along the floor of the narrow and lengthy tunnel back to the main village, which must have taken hours. He hoped that somehow Taipu had been as fortunate as him in avoiding drowning at the bottom of the mine, but he had little faith in that possibility. He caught a tiny glimpse of a light moving far off in the distance. He strained his eyes to identify its source, making out the vague shape of a Matoran carrying a lightstone searching through the wreckage. A swell of joy and relief filled Onepu's chest as he started toward the light.
Over here, Taipu!
Onepu called as he shambled forward, bumping and scraping over so many unidentifiable objects along the way until he was tripped up entirely. He landed mask first into a shallow puddle. He pushed himself up on his hands when he felt the object that had tripped him up pull away, revealing it to be something living.
Onepu?
Said a soft voice from within the darkness.
Is that you?
Taipu! My dear friend, you're alive!
Are you all right, Onepu?
Yes, I am. Just a little disoriented. Can you say the same?
I'm fine, but I can't see.
I believe the flood swept away all the streetlights, but I just spotted a third Matoran across the village carrying a lightstone. I believed him to be you at first.
Taipu's tone suddenly grew sorrowful.
So, we didn't get everyone out after all.
Perhaps not, but he survived nonetheless. Come, we need to see who it is.
Taipu hopped to his feet and followed Onepu as they slowly navigated their way through the darkness.
What happened to all the water?
It has drained into the great mine,
Onepu replied before stumbling over a rock and catching himself against the side of a house.
Though if it had poured in from the reef, I am unsure how it stopped.
That's really lucky.
As much as one could be in such circumstances, yes. It seems our destinies have yet to be fulfilled.
Who do you think that is, over there?
It's hard to say. He's still much too far away. We need to get his attention.
Onepu climbed up onto the collapsed wall of a nearby structure and waved his arms over his head. Taipu followed behind and did the same. Together, they called out toward the unknown Matoran. After a few attempts, they noticed him stop and glance toward their direction.
Does he see us?
Taipu asked.
I believe so,
Onepu replied as he continued to wave his arms.
You there! Over here!
The Matoran jogged toward their location, sweeping his lightstone over his path to avoid tripping up on the scattered mess that littered the village. As he moved closer, Onepu and Taipu started toward him before meeting in the middle.
Who goes there?
Onepu asked as they approached the stranger.
It's me, Captain,
said the Matoran, holding up his lightstone to reveal his bright orange Great Pakari, which contrasted the rest of his black and gray body.
Looks like I'm not trapped here alone, after all.
Nuparu,
Onepu recalled.
Are you hurt?
I'm fine, just a little shaken. Are we all that's left?
I believe so. Taipu and I elected to stay behind to ensure the evacuation was complete. The Tarago was the last one to escape.
How did you get stuck down here?
Taipu asked.
I had intended to join the evacuation, but the roof of my house had other plans. Luckily, the flood loosened the debris, and I swam to the ceiling until the water receded. I've been searching for other survivors ever since.
Look no further. We need to find a way out. Hopefully we can manage that before we starve to death.
Drowning is still more likely at the moment.
What do you mean?
Follow me.
Nuparu led Onepu and Taipu out toward the wall of the cavern, carefully stepping over the wreckage of collapsed homes and broken structures. As they moved further, they began to feel the frigid ocean water racing around their feet. Nuparu shined his lightstone to reveal the multiple springs of ocean water pouring out from the collapsed Marne tunnel entrance.
The flooding was stopped by the cave-in,
Nuparu explained.
but it's not watertight. We'll need to seal it before we plan our escape.
We ought not to waste any more time, then,
Onepu replied. Nuparu turned, shining his lightstone in search of extra debris or stones that could plug the leaks. They were met with the startling sight of a Bohrok crouched no more than a yard from where they stood. The three Onumatoran collectively jumped back until they saw that the creature made no attempt to attack.
It's all right. It's dead.
Yeah.
Nuparu replied softly as he took a cautious step toward the expired creature. He held the lightstone over its body, finding the sweeping plate that armored its oversized head had been spilled forward. He looked into the open skull, finding a clear absence of any contents inside. He slowly reached out, poking his clawed finger against one of the creature's empty eyes. He received no reaction even as he pressed against it.
I'd say dead is an understatement, but I'm hesitant to make any assumptions about these things.
Nuparu stepped around the body, carefully examining every angle. He lifted its limp arm for a closer look at its hand shield, causing the carcass to topple onto its side. He then stooped down to study its cloven feet. As Onukoro's most prolific inventor, engineer, and scientist, Nuparu was widely regarded all over the island to be one of the greatest Matoran minds to ever live. He designed most of the gadgets and tools used by both miners and the Usselry, and was the reason the Onumatoran were the first and only race to make limited use of electricity. He was also the island's leading physician, having spent decades studying the anatomy of all types of Matoran, and had even authored numerous reference books, which had been carefully studied by doctors all across the island. Due to the mostly mechanical nature of Matoran, his skills as an engineer had often been of great use when performing surgical procedures. From replacing damaged armor to mending broken bones to suturing wounds from Rahi attacks, Nuparu had the highest success rate out of any physician. No other Matoran had ever pursued knowledge as relentlessly as Nuparu.
Nuparu,
Onepu called, pointing toward the water that sprayed from the collapsed tunnel.
were you not the one to reveal our more pressing matter?
Right.
Nuparu replied, snapping out of his distracting appraisal.
Sorry.
The three Onumatoran got to work at stopping the flow of the tunnel. Sticking close to Nuparu's lightstone, they searched the area for broken stones and other refuse. Unsurprisingly, Taipu did most of the heavy lifting. The process was long and tedious, but ultimately successful.
That's better.
Nuparu said as they admired the result of their hard work.
Now we can starve to death.
Now we make our escape. Find yourselves some pickaxes and shovels.
Next, we search for food.
Nuparu countered.
We'll likely be down here for a while. So, we should find what we can and stock up before we tire ourselves out trying to dig our way to the surface.
But that could take hours. We can't afford to spare another moment.
And our escape could take days, weeks even. We'll need our strength up during that time. We might as well make ourselves comfortable.
I am getting hungry.
Taipu added.
I suppose your point is valid. Come then.
Nuparu glanced back at the dead Bohrok a final time before heading off. Without lightstones of their own, Onepu and Taipu had little choice but to follow behind. As they walked along the streets, they overturned every brick, log, or stone they could see. Minutes passed before a single word was spoken.
I hope we find something to eat soon.
Taipu finally said.
I'm sure we will,
Nuparu assured as he scanned the area. He suddenly halted its pace, holding the lightstone out toward the distance.
What exactly do you expect to find?
Onepu asked.
Any chance of finding sustenance in these conditions is likely at the bottom of the great mine along with everything else.
Shut up,
Nuparu said flatly.
That is no way to speak to your usselry, Captain.
No, really, shut up. I hear something.
Nuparu motioned for the other two to stop walking as he listened intently to his surroundings. Once the noisy footsteps had been eliminated, he heard the faint echo of sporadic slapping against the pavement. Still holding out his lightstone, he walked toward the source of the sound, noticing it become more frequent as he came closer. Overturning a broken chair, he found its source.
I hope you like seafood,
Nuparu said, holding up an agitated fish by its tail toward the other Matoran.
You did it!
Taipu exclaimed as he rushed over to inspect the fish.
Where did it come from?
The floodwaters likely carried it in from the reef,
Onepu replied.
which means there's bound to be more scattered about. But we still don't have a way to safely prepare them. There's not a single thing in Onukoro that isn't wet. How are we to build a fire?
I keep a heatstone keg back at my house. Assuming it's still there, we won't need a fire.
Onepu rolled his eyes.
You possess a solution for everything, don't you?
There are much worse things to possess right now.
Nuparu shrugged as he led them toward where his house used to stand.
An empty stomach, for instance.
They soon arrived at Nuparu's home. The walls had remained upright despite the roof collapsing beneath a fallen stalactite, which had blocked the door. Nuparu dropped the fish onto the ground outside and climbed through one of the windows which led into his workshop. He re-emerged a few moments later, handing Taipu a hefty cylindrical container that was roughly the size of his torso before climbing back out.
I also keep some spare lightstones in with my other tools,
Nuparu said before passing 2 extra lightstones to Onepu. Taipu set down the keg and removed the lid, causing the faint orange glow of the heatstones to bathe them in a comforting heat. They huddled close to it for a moment before Nuparu got to work preparing the fish, while Onepu and Taipu searched the nearby area, eventually finding many more. They soon feasted on the ocean fish that they had cooked over the heatstone keg while they sat just outside Nuparu's home, each possessing a lightstone to illuminate the area.
So how did you end up trapped inside your house during the evacuation?
Onepu finally asked.
The stalactites hadn't begun to fall until the villagers had cleared.
I took too much time gathering my things.
Answered Nuparu.
Research notes, schematics, that sort of thing. Seems a bit silly in hindsight, but I managed to save most of it.
What were you possibly working on that could be so important?
Medical breakthroughs I had planned on sharing with the rest of the island, but I was working on a new invention as well. After the losses suffered at Kininui, I was motivated to find more effective ways to fight back against the dangers of the island when the Toa are too busy to help us. I eventually landed on the idea of a hydraulic exoskeleton that could supplement the wearer's strength.
Ambitious.
Only it's still a long way away before anything even remotely close could be made. The resources required aren't exactly feasible.
Neither Onepu nor Taipu had any further questions to ask, so they all sat and ate in silence. Once the meal was concluded, Nuparu stood up and began to walk off into the darkness.
What are you doing?
Taipu asked.
Taking advantage of the downtime,
Nuparu said before disappearing. Onepu watched him walk away before turning to Taipu.
Of all the Matoran to be stuck here with, it just had to be him. He is undoubtedly resourceful, I suppose, but I have always found him to be unbearably pretentious.
I don't know what that means,
replied Taipu.
Ostentatious.
Onepu noticed Taipu's quizzical expression remained unchanged.
Oh, never mind.
Nuparu returned to the light shortly after, dragging a dead Bohrok by its ankle. He dropped it beside his lightstone and climbed back through his workshop window to retrieve a large toolbox. He sifted through the box to retrieve a finely serrated blade before kneeling down beside the body.
What on Motunui are you doing?
Onepu asked.
Learning something, hopefully.
Nuparu replied as he lifted up the head of the Bohrok. Its eyes beamed to life, and the Onumatoran was thrown to the ground as it jerked its head from his grasp. Taipu and Onepu sprung back as it screeched in anger. It struggled to maneuver its mangled limbs in an attempt to attack the nearest Matoran. It snapped its eyes toward Taipu before its headplate swung open. The squishy, Kanohi-like brain that pulsated inside its skull was flung forward, causing the Bohrok to slink lifelessly to the ground before Nuparu could climb back to his feet.
Get it off!
Taipu cried as the brain suctioned onto his Picari, smearing a trail of slime across the mask as it began to slip behind it. Before it could reach Taipu's face, Onepu ripped it away and tossed it into the heatstone keg. A piercing hiss sprayed from the heat stones as the organic thing writhed in the heat before flopping out onto the floor. Nuparu rushed toward it with the knife in hand, only for it to die before he could act.
Are you trying to get us killed?
Onepu snapped.
Why did it do that?
Taipu asked, wiping the slime from his mask.
I don't know, but I'd like to find out,
replied Nuparu as he stared down at the dead brain.
So long as your insatiable curiosity doesn't bring about our end.
Nuparu knelt down to pick up the brain, which was still almost too hot to hold and slightly heavier than he expected. He dropped it beside his lightstone and proceeded to study it. He turned it over several times, baffled by its peculiar mask-like shape. After inspecting every detail, he quickly realized he wouldn't find any answers by simply continuing to stare at it. He prodded its soft surface with the point of his knife before preparing to make an incision down its center. He ran the blade down, failing to puncture the tissue. Pressing harder for a second attempt, he was still unable to make a proper cut.
I could use your help, Taipu,
Nuparu said, handing the knife to the approaching Matoran.
Now's your chance for revenge.
Taipu made his attempt to pierce the brain, but even with his renowned strength, he found it difficult. He eventually tried stabbing into it with the point of the blade before pressing his full weight down onto it, where he was finally able to break through. Silvery gel oozed out of the wound as the color of the brain faded.
Strangely durable,
Nuparu commented as he dipped his talons into the gooey substance and rubbed them together.
And protodermis-based.
Isn't everything?
Not entirely. The Garmatoran have occasionally caught species of fish that contain no traces of protodermis in their makeup.
Nuparu then moved over to the Bohrok body and began to break it down using his collection of tools. He thoroughly pored over every piece he removed, noting every minute detail before moving on to the next. As the minutes passed by, his curiosity only grew stronger with every inspection.
Weird,
Nuparu muttered, speaking to himself just as much as to the other Matoran.
They're just machines on the inside, but I'm still finding small prints of organic tissue spread throughout their bodies for some reason.
Brilliant,
Onepu said before picking up his lightstone.
Well, while you're occupied with your autopsy, we'll be working towards a way out of here.
Wait.
What is it?
Taipu asked.
These things. The machinery that powers them is far beyond anything I've ever seen. Yet I'm starting to grasp its system. If you just give me some time, I could reverse engineer what I'm seeing here.
And is that somehow going to help us escape?
Nuparu looked up at the Usselry captain, forming a wide smile behind his mask.
It just might.